This is Dave, and I'm here with Ethan, and together we are Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, episode 110-inch.
On this week's episode, we interview conductor, composer, and arranger Sean O'Loughlin, who orchestrated songs for Weird Al's Hollywood Bowl concerts and the Strings Attached tour.
It's Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
It's a podcast about Weird Al.
It's Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
Seriously, the whole podcast is about Weird Al.
Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
You don't have to listen, but we're glad you are.
Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
Hey, Ethan, and welcome to this week's Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Wow, what a pleasure it was to interview that podcast guy last week, Lex Fridman.
Yeah, it was great talking to him about being a research scientist at MIT and working on human-centered artificial intelligence.
Wait, why exactly did we interview him again?
Well, because artificial intelligence is often shortened as capital A, capital I, which totally looks like Al if you're not paying attention.
Wait, wouldn't it have made much more sense for us to have spoken to Lex Fridman? You know, the lifelong Weird Al superfan, podcaster, and author behind Weird Al's deal to publish each of the 77 tour stops on the ridiculously self-indulgent, ill-advised Vanity Tour as Stitcher Premium episodes instead?
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
Anyway, isn't it time for This Week in Weird Al related news?
I don't know. I think we should flip a coin and find out.
Okay. No, it's time for an ad about two relatively close to each other incredible vegan restaurants.
I suppose I could read this one. This week's episode is brought to you in part by vegan burrito restaurant Burrito in Troy, New York, home of the 2-pound double wrapped in a quesadilla burrito, and Wizard Burger in Albany, New York. Come on down to Burrito and Burrito your burrito, or hop on over to Wizard Burger for mouth-watering, loaded, dare I say, beefy vegan burgers. From Troy to Albany to Uranus, Burrito and Wizard Burger feed the hungry with out-of-this-world, plant-based, real food, always vegan style. Visit burritosquare.com or wizardburger.com and order ahead.
All right, let's flip that coin again.
This week in Weird Al related news?
No, it landed on Swen de Taler la Drew ni Kuik Sech.
What?
Oh, no, wait, it's This Week in Weird Al related news.
The Grammy Award-winning podcast theme song writing Jim Kimo West has announced that his brand new CD will be released this coming June 18th.
Yes, the new CD is officially called Kahauna Malohia Peaceful World, and it's a follow-up to his Grammy-nominated CD, Moku Malohia Peaceful Island.
The new CD features 12 original tracks along with a slew of awesome guest performers.
You can pre-order the album right now at a special price over at jimkimowest.com and order it ahead of time, and you will get an autographed copy and free shipping. Be sure to head to jimkimowest.com for this awesome deal.
And Grammy Award-winning podcast theme song writing Jim Kimo West also announced that live shows are returning. Jim will be headlining the Hawaiian Music Festival in Fullerton, California on July 1st. That's 7 p.m. Hollywood start time for those of you in the area.
And speaking of live shows returning, this August is the return of the Funny Music Festival, Thump Fest. Live in person.
It will be happening this coming August 20th through August 22nd in Chicago, Illinois. And the guest of honor this year is none other than Dr. Demento.
Yes, they will be celebrating Dr. Demento's radio show's 50th anniversary, which was last year, but obviously they couldn't do one in person last year, so he's still the guest of honor.
Some musical guests have also been announced as well, and they include Insane Ian, Nuclear Bubble Wrap, Worm Quartet, and a bunch of others.
To find out how to attend and for other information, head over to fumpfest.com and be sure to join their mailing list for free funny music downloads.
If you can believe it, this past Saturday, June 5th, marked the 2-year anniversary of the start of the Strings Attached tour.
The tour ran from June 5th to September 1st, 2019, and featured 67 shows across 64 venues covering the United States and Canada.
This was Weird Al's biggest tour to date, and it's the first to feature backup singers in Lisa Popeil, Scotty Haskell, and Monique Donnelly. And it was also the first to feature conductors in the father and son team, Arnie Roth and Eric Roth, who shared most of the conducting duties, along with guest conductor Scott O'Neill filling in at the sold-out show at the Red Rocks Amphitheater.
Regular listeners of the podcast will know that Dave and I each attended 18 of those 67 shows, and we cataloged each and every one we went to with special bonus centimeter episodes, which are still available on your favorite podcast app or by heading over to 2000inch.com.
Those were a lot of fun to record and a lot of fun to listen back to. So if you have not listened to them in a while, take this opportunity, the 2-year anniversary of the Strings Attached tour, to go back and re-listen to your favorite Strings Attached bonus centimeter episodes.
And if you do go through, we would love it if someone actually made a spreadsheet of the colors of the drink and everything else we tracked. That will only make sense to people who've listened to the bonus episodes. So if you're curious, now's the time to tune in and listen to those.
All 27 bonus centimeter episodes are archived on 2000inch.com. Now, Ethan and I are really itching to do some more Contra reviews, so come on, Al, announce a new tour already.
All right, I think it's time to flip the coin again.
All right, let me flip and see. All right, it looks like it is time for this week's interview.
Dave and I are absolutely thrilled to be welcoming to the program. He is the principal pops conductor of the Victoria Symphony and the principal pops conductor of Symphoria in Syracuse, New York. We're most familiar with his work as orchestrator for Weird Al Yankovic's Hollywood Bowl shows, as well as Strings Attached tour. We're so excited to welcome Sean O'Loughlin. How's it going, Sean?
Hey, Dave, Ethan. I am well. Happy to be here. What a pleasant surprise this is.
Yeah, we're so excited to chat with you. So, I guess first off, how exactly are you a conductor of a symphony in Canada and in Syracuse, New York, and you live in LA? How does that work?
It's a bit of a triangular thing that goes on, but no, actually the Syracuse position came up first. I grew up in Syracuse, listening and studying with many of the members of the orchestra, and there was an opening for their principal pops conductor, and I didn't really even know that I was in the running for something like that until I got a phone call where they invited me to join the group. And it was the former Syracuse Symphony, but went through a really heartbreaking bankruptcy. But the players kind of stuck it through and reformed as a co-op orchestra, and we had to change the name to Symphoria. So it's a bit of a made-up name, but it's in the Urban Dictionary as the feeling you get when you listen to a symphony. So,
cool.
Nice.
I mean, for me, it's a great way to keep, one foot in the town that I grew up in, Syracuse, New York, and my mom and dad, my 2 sisters and their families are still there. So, it's nice. I get to go back maybe 5 or 6 times a year, conduct the orchestra, visit with family and friends, and also it's great from an artistic and professional standpoint because I'm getting to conduct a great orchestra every time I go there, and we're constantly, in an evolution of programming and trying to come up with exciting new shows and the like, and hopefully someday I'll be able to bring Al in and get on the stage there, both in Syracuse and Victoria. I think that would be a no-brainer. But
Oh yeah,
and then the Victoria Symphony connection came out of a guest conducting opportunity that I was given there almost 10 years ago. My manager at the time had a relationship with the executive director, and there was an opening in their schedule, and so he suggested me. And it turned out that was my first initial conducting gig, where it was me hosting, and I created a movie music program. And then fast forward about 4 or 5 years later, after I had guest conduct, they invited me back several times. I got offered the position for principal pops conductor, and I'm happy to report that both orchestras have generously extended my contracts, so I'll be there for several more years in each place, and they're both near and dear to my heart. Victoria's like a second home, and of course Syracuse I grew up going to, and my family enjoys traveling to both places to see the shows and all that. So it's kind of a good, like, I know it sounds odd to have two places so far away, but it's like a way to ground myself and know that I have, kind of a steady gig to look forward to and to be a part of those communities, even though I drop in and out for a week at a time. But both communities have been just so warm and welcoming to not only me, but my family, and also the ideas that I have for shows that are not necessarily just, playing music for an audience. We like to create experiences, and I know Al is all about that as well.
Yeah.
He creates an experience for his fans when you go to his show. So, and you guys know, you've been to more shows than I have.
Well, I think what's really interesting about your two sort of locations is those are both stops that Al was on his Strings Attached tour, and I was at the Syracuse show, and Dave and I were both at the Victoria show back in 2019.
Oh yeah, I heard some rumblings about it. I think some colleagues of mine were hired for the local orchestra members to be a part of that, and they said they had an absolute blast with it, and they giggled when they saw my name all over the place on the music. So they're like, we can't get away from this guy even when we take another gig. So, but yeah, I mean, what did you guys think of Victoria? It's a pretty special place, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the first time I've really been in that area of North America, and it's really very pretty, very beautiful. I definitely would love to go back and spend more time there. It's such an amazing area.
Yeah, it's odd that it's considered the Deep South, right, for Canada.
Right.
Even though it's like go to Seattle and make a left, but
Yeah.
I've just really enjoyed the culture there, and the people are just so warm and welcoming, and I've gotten to know a lot of the orchestra members there on as much a friendship level as a colleague level, and it's just very rewarding along those lines. And as an avid golfer, they have some great golf courses up there that I've enjoyed when when the weather cooperates. So so it's been a nice connection all around. And it's so funny you mentioned the tour stops being at each of those cities. I looked at the dates and I just giggled. I'm like, you can't make this up. That I mean, they're not exactly Chicago and LA, right? Or Chicago and Vancouver,
right?
When you say Syracuse and Victoria. But and I know some of my colleagues in Syracuse had a blast with the show as well. And Ethan, you said you grew up there, right? When we were talking before we got on the podcast here.
Well, I didn't grow up there. Both
or
of
you
my
have family from
yeah,
there.
both of my parents grew up there, and my grandmothers live there. All my cousins, my aunts and uncles, they're all up in Syracuse. So I spend a lot of time there.
It's a great place too. It was a great place to grow up, and kind of gave me my launch pad to move out here to LA to pursue music and music career with the opportunities here in LA. Ironically, it's like my first professional position is back in Syracuse.
Right.
I felt like Al Pacino and The Godfather. Just when I thought they're out, they pulled me back in. But it's, like I said, it's been a win-win for everyone. For me, staying connected to my hometown, and then also being able to forward my career in such a satisfying and very logical way is really it's just a good thing.
Sean, we're tossing around a lot of terms here: composer, arranger, conductor, orchestrator. Can you just give us a high-level, definition of the responsibilities of what each of those terms are?
Yeah, I mean, conductor is pretty self-explanatory, right? Where it's the person in front of the orchestra kind of leading the performance and starting and stopping pieces, delivering their interpretation. Tempos, how fast or slow things go is kind of dictated by the conductor, and what if there's different sections of the orchestra that they want to bring out. Like, it's almost like a live mixer in certain standpoints, because you can make adjustments, and if you want the horns to come out here and there. So there's that's a very performing type element, right? When you're a conductor, you're on the stage with the rest of the orchestra or concert band or whatever ensemble you're with, choir. And so there's a very tactile kind of connection to the music as a conductor. For me as a composer, that's more of an original creation type of activity. So you study, for me, I have a composition degree from New England Conservatory in Boston, and then an undergrad at Syracuse University with composition and music education. So I had a teaching degree as well. And I find like the amalgamation of those 3 degrees really helps me to function on the professional level in different capacities. So I do conduct, as we had spoken, but But I also compose original music, and I'm delighted to be published by Excelsior Music, Carl Fisher Music, and Hal Leonard Publishing. So I have publishing relationships with 3 of the major publishers in the field, and so along those lines, when you talk about like as a composer, it's more referring to the original creation of music versus taking someone else's music and adapting it. And that would kind of fall under the arranger category. So if you take, like, say, an existing song, or maybe it's an existing symphony, and you kind of arrange it or adapt it to a different version, maybe the length is different. You cut out a chorus here or there, or it's for a different group. Like say, for example, if you take one of Al's songs that's written for him on, singing, sometimes accordion, sometimes not. Depends on how he feels that day, and then he's got his great band behind him. So when you take that music and then, take Al and the band away from it, but keep the song itself, and then say maybe write it for a concert band or an orchestra without vocals, well, that's technically arranging. You're taking the original version of something and adapting it to a different version, but it's still the same song or same music. And then finally, there's the orchestrator hat that many of us wear in the industry here in Los Angeles, where I'm based, and around the country and around the world, of course. But orchestration is really the craft of adding instruments to an existing piece of music. So, say for example, my relationship with Weird Al came from the orchestrator standpoint, where he had his songs, the length, the format of the songs were what they were, his band and he were singing and playing. So what I did is I added orchestral instruments to that texture to and I like to use the term reimagine his songs. And so I worked very closely with Al in terms of, and he's so astute and so articulate with what he wanted to hear. We talked about some song, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but just talking about what you want to hear. Like, do you want a big brassy sound, or do you want like a high string or a tension string or a lush strings, or do you want, woodwinds kind of sweetening that sound? I mean, all of that kind of falls into the orchestration bucket. And it really kind of, think of it as a painter, right? Where you're painting with different colors. The colors just happen to be the instruments of the orchestra in this case. So an oboe is going to sound different from a flute, or than a trumpet, than a horn. And so you use those colors to kind of create a different texture of sound that the audience can enjoy. And from my standpoint, I'm only trying to enhance the sound of these songs. I'm not trying to take away from what Al's vocals are, which are absolutely brilliant, by the way. And his, I mean, he is like a Pulitzer Prize winning lyricist by the way that he crafts these lyrics to existing songs, which is another added element of difficulty. But so, just to kind of stay on task with the orchestrator thing, it really is like a painter with a palette and kind of painting colors that happen to be realized as sounds and audible music along the way. So I hope that's not too much of an astute, academic definition, but more of a, this is what you're going to hear from each one of those definitions.
Thank you for that. I think that was exactly what I was looking for. That was a great way to sum that up. Now, you of course were the orchestrator for Weird Al.
Yes.
Several of his songs that were performed at the Hollywood Bowl. How did you end up working with Weird Al?
I have a really healthy and a very fortunate relationship with one of the promoters or the talent bookers at the Hollywood Bowl. Consequently, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, they're the parent company for the Hollywood Bowl and the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. And so I'm really fortunate to be one of a few people here in the Los Angeles area who get to work on projects like this. And she said to me, basically, we have Weird Al booked for a set with the orchestra, and we'd love to have you, arrange and orchestrate the songs for the orchestra to play along. And the Hollywood Bowl has a long-standing history of taking, popular bands, singer-songwriters, etc., and presenting them with orchestra. And they're kind of the leading artistic orchestra in that regard. So sometimes it's with the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, which is conducted by Thomas Wilkins, wonderful conductor. And then sometimes it's with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which Gustavo Dudamel is the music director, but he typically won't conduct the band with orchestra type presentations, but occasionally he does, and it's really fun to watch. So between those relationships that I've built over the several years that I've been here in Los Angeles, that's how I came to be paired up with Al. And then from there, we kind of emailed back and forth, and once Al had kind of sorted out what the set list was going to be and what songs he wanted to play with the orchestra, because there's also a couple songs there that I think he just did on his own without the orchestra performing with him, which is, it's a nice variety for the overall concert itself for the audience. But it ended up being, I'm trying to count here, I have the list in front of me, it was almost like 12 or 13 songs that I ended up orchestrating for that program. So I did the whole show at the Hollywood Bowl. There was no other orchestrators on it. So it was a busy 3 to 4 weeks for me where I was cranking out like a song every day or two.
Wow.
Wow.
And it was, it's, you get into a mode, right? I mean, we all do what we do. So, I've worked hard. People ask me, how do you start, or what do you do and all that? I said, well, you're looking at it from, how did you do it today? You don't realize that I've been studying music since I was, 10 years old, and then went to, music school and all that. So this, what you're seeing me do at this point, or at that point, back in 2016, when I worked on the show with him, it was kind of the culmination of all of the skill and the craftsmanship that you gather over the years. So, the process starts where Al gave me the songs, and he gave me, sometimes it was studio recordings of the songs that he wanted to do, and other times it was live versions.
Okay.
Typically, when I work with a band or or a singer-songwriter, I'll ask for live recordings because I want to know the format, like formally how they're going to perform the song live. And so I don't want to, work on something, then all of a sudden when they go to play it live, it's different, and then because it's much easier to work out those kinks in the writing orchestration process than it is on stage with 100 orchestra musicians on, waiting for you to kind of make changes along those lines. So there's a lot of back and forth between, in this particular show, Al worked with me directly. I didn't work with a music director or an intermediary. I worked with Al directly, which was awesome. He had me over to his house, and we kind of went through each song. And I'm looking through the notes because I brought my laptop, and I'm like typing feverishly. I'm like, slow down, Al. It's like we started working on. I think the first one we did was Fat, and he just starts going like, and I'm like, slow down. I got to write some notes so I know what I'm doing when I get back home. Because his mind works at just a different pace and level than yours and I do. But no, it was really cool to hear his take on what he thinks the orchestra should sound like behind his songs. Because at the end of the day, these are his, signature, songs, and the way that he takes, the real songs, like Bad and turns it into Fat, or Royals and turns it into Foil, or, Born This Way into Perform This Way, or, Smells Like Teen Spirit into Smells Like Nirvana. It's amazing to see the process that he goes through. But for a lot of these bands and alike, they don't write anything down. So I only got recordings to work from. So my job now is to turn that into real, sheet music that the musicians on stage and the orchestra can read and play and be in sync with Al as they go to perform everything. So it's, transcribing what I heard, making up the chords and kind of, for me, the process starts with the bass line, because the bass line, you can sort out any song from the bass line, because the bass line is the foundation of the harmony. You can tell where you are in the song. You can tell where it lines up with the lyric if you kind of write out the bass line. And then the second thing for me is the lyric with the melody of the vocal. And so once you get those two elements in place, then the fun starts for me, because you have kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end and the choruses, the verses, and all that, and you know where everything's going. Like everything is laid out, and it's like a skeleton. So now you get to fill in everything. And for me, the process always starts with being incredibly respectful to the vocal, because this is Weird Al's show, right? These are his songs. This is his lyrics. And so I don't want the orchestra to be too busy where it takes away from what the lyric is. And in some cases, man, he is singing fast, as you guys know. I mean, some of the rap things that he does. I mean, you're holding on for dear life, or even worse, the polka ones. Those are even faster sometimes. Yeah. So you want to be careful when you create orchestra music to support that it doesn't, jump into it. It doesn't get in the way, and then all of a sudden there's this chaos that doesn't have clarity. And so we went back and forth. I would send Al like a little synth demo, and then I asked him, straight on. I said, "Would a PDF of the conductor score help you?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I can read." He goes, "I don't like to, but because I can read music." So what ended up happening was, because of that, we were able to really pinpoint areas of the original, orchestration that I did that he liked to adjust. So he would be like, "Hey, measure 25. Can we lose that one hit in the brass? It just seemed too much." And so there was this collaboration back and forth where we felt like, we did all the hard work of really ironing out what these songs should be realized as with the orchestra before the orchestra even got to the stage, and which is typical. You have to be so economic in your time during rehearsal, because typically you'll only get 1-2.5 hour rehearsal to put everything together. So, which presents a lot of stress and challenges and pressure to kind of perform. And so that's why the process that I like to use involves a lot of ironing out the details before we get to the rehearsal. And the case is in point two with the tour. I mean, literally, like, he would have multiple days in a row in different cities. So you literally have like an afternoon rehearsal and then the show that night, and you pack the whole thing up and, truck off to the next place. Yeah. So you have to be very, almost OCD, for lack of a better word, with how accurate these arrangements are and these orchestrations are, so that it does line up with what Al's doing. He feels like it's taking the songs to a different place and it's something new. And it's not just like a hackneyed, almost like a puffy pillow behind the music. Like, there's got to be some movement. And to me, there's got to be at least a little bit of dialogue. So like when the vocal is singing like a very active line, I'll have supporting in the orchestra, not a lot of movement. But then there's times where he'll either breathe from his phrase, or there'll be like a little area in the music for an instrumental, and that's when the orchestra would swell for what I would write. And it goes back to the relationship that Frank Sinatra had with Nelson Riddle. All those, Come Fly With Me, all those great songs from the Great American Songbook. If you go back and listen to them, first of all, Frank knew the arrangement almost better than Nelson Riddle, who wrote it, did. So he knew when to soar with the vocal and then when to pull back. And the same thing was true with the orchestra. When the vocal's pulling back, that's when the orchestra would soar, and vice versa. And so I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind when I approach each of these orchestrations along the lines. And also just from a sense of clarity. Like, there's nothing worse than hearing too much going on at the same time, and then you don't know what the hell's going on, right?
But one thing I'm wondering about, it seems like a lot of the songs that you did orchestration for were actually parody songs. How do you approach that? Do you listen to the original song that's being parodied? Are there, even potentially orchestrations for those songs already existing that you can reference?
Yeah, I mean, the Yoda one, Y-O-D-A, Yoda. I mean, and then also White and Nerdy, Word Crimes. We use some of those like synth strings that were in the original version, but Al, of course, included them in his version as well. So we wanted to be, really respectful of that, because in a lot of ways, the White and Nerdy, that sound is going to be what you remember. So, or it makes that sound. that song, I should say, like the string lines. So we wanted to make sure we included those just to kind of keep the authenticity of it and not seem like it was a complete, redo or whatever it may be. So, so yeah, we did. I mean, I went back and, of course, listening to Fat, and, I grew up with, in the 80s listening to or watching MTV and all that. So, you couldn't go 5 minutes without seeing a Michael Jackson video. And, hearing that bad, bad and all that was just awesome, so.
I'm curious, Sean, when you're orchestrating for a show, and I don't know if we touched on this yet, but you were actually the conductor at the Hollywood Bowl shows. That was Thomas Wilkins.
It was Thomas Wilkins, yeah.
Yeah, you did all the orchestration for that. When you're writing orchestration for a show that you're not going to be conducting, is there any difference in the way you approach writing the orchestration, knowing it's for somebody else rather than yourself to conduct?
Not a whole lot. The one thing that helps any conductor is to have really well organized music. So, we read music just like we read a book, left to right. So, in music we have phrases, right? So starts of verses, starts of choruses or the bridge or whatever, the song form may be. And for me, it's organizing the conductor score in a way that's super clear when each of those sections begin. So whether it be putting a word cue at the top of the music that says verse 1, also including the lyrics themselves in the melody line on the score can be really helpful, because sometimes these things, and it's just any song, right? Any popular song has an element of repetitiveness to it, right? So if you have, 3-4 verses, sometimes they can sound the same, and without the lyric there to kind of designate what verse you're on, sometimes you can get a little lost in the process when they kind of roll around on on themselves. So the more clarity that you can provide in the conductor score, and also in the parts for the musicians, which I end up I create most of the parts for all the arrangements that I do, and it's one of the first things I did when I moved to Los Angeles. I worked for a music preparation house here that worked on movies and TV shows and the like. So I was used to creating parts that LA studio musicians would read and perform from. So I take that same knowledge and I apply it to these live performances, because like I alluded to earlier, the rehearsal time is minimal for these performances that you see with orchestras. So the more clarity and economics of sound that you can use, the better chance you have to put it together in the shortest amount of time. So, because all these orchestras that Al performed with along the tour were either sitting orchestras like the National Symphony. I know he did at Wolf Trap.
Yep.
And the only reason I knew that is I came through there as conducting for Sarah McLachlan with orchestra like 2 weeks after Al was there.
Oh wow!
And so they were asking me all sorts of they were asking me all sorts of questions, and I guess Al got a little loud on stage for that performance. It kind of ruffled some feathers, which is understandable. The orchestra musicians are very protective of their ears when it gets too loud. Their orchestras aren't used to performing with mics, right? So you have to be considerate to that, and their ears are part of their living. So it was funny when I got asked about Sarah McLachlan. I said, it's Sarah McLachlan, right? I don't think we're going to worry about being too loud. She's just the most beautiful siren of a voice, and an even better person than a singer, which is amazing. But so so along those lines, having music that's well organized for Al, that they can plug and play with each orchestra no matter where they are is super important and almost integral to the success of the tour.
Now, did you work with anyone in addition to Al on these orchestrations, like members of his band?
I did not. Al was the one that was kind of driving the bus with me. And so, and unfortunately not being able to go to the performance at the Hollywood Bowl or being able to go to any of the tour dates really bummed me out. I had some conflicts in my scheduling that didn't allow me to be there, but I know his band is incredible, and just from listening to the recordings, it's amazing how many different styles are required of them to perform in one show.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you play, you know, you're in Sting's band where you know it's going to be like, you know, medium tempo, kind of really, you know, one style, or you know, or if you're in Metallica where you know it's going to be one style. I mean, they play one style, right? I mean, Al's songs just run the gamut, right? I mean, all of a sudden he busts out the accordion and we're full polka mode. You know, look out below. You know, and then all of a sudden there's a Nirvana song in there, and there's a Lady Gaga song, and then there's, you know, Michael Jackson, and, you know, there's even, you know, a Pharrell song with Tacky. Right. You know, I mean, just so many different hats they have to wear, you know, to you know, be able to function as a chameleon almost, and be able to play each one of those styles at the highest level, which they do. Amazing. The guys were were in the band that I was there was Jim West. He played guitar. Steve J played bass. John Bermuda Schwartz was drums, and Ruben Valtierra was on keyboards, kind of backing up what Al would do. And then my favorite moments is when Al just picked up that accordion and you could not stop him. You know, you'd have to call the police to get him off stage once he gets going, but pretty amazing.
Did you end up working on any songs that didn't end up getting used?
There was only, I'm trying to look through here. There was like one version of Cell Phones that we started to work on, and then Al kind of did like a little bit of a left turn and decided not to use that, and we did a different thing. So it's very rare, and maybe this is me being selfish, but I like to get songs and set lists that are locked in before I start working, because typically I'll only have maybe 5 to 6 weeks before a show to work on everything. Okay. So time is really of the essence. And so, you know, to try something out and see how it is, I don't really like doing that if I don't have to. But yeah, so I mean, for the most part, the songs at the Hollywood Bowl show were all the ones that he had locked in. And, you know, there's different people that with the orchestra that you have to go through in production and all that. And actually the production value at the Bowl show was amazing with all the video and the costume changes and, you know, you name it. Al like pulled all the stops out for that show, which was amazing. And my wife and 2 daughters were able to go. And so she FaceTimed me. I forget where I was. I was on tour somewhere, and so she FaceTimed me one of the songs, and I was on a tour bus with some of the band that I was performing with, and they were getting a kick out of it.
Oh, cool.
And Al was so gracious. He had my 2 daughters backstage with my wife, of course, and he spent a little time with them after the show. And at the Hollywood Bowl show, they were selling at the concession stand like little hats that recreated Al's signature hair. So I have a great photo of my daughters, I think, were 8 and 5 at the time, and there's a great photo of the 2 of them with Al, and they all have this crazy hair. And it's just one that I really cherish, and it felt like I was there, you know, even though I wasn't.
Wow.
But, and he was so gracious. He was like, yeah, anytime you guys want to come backstage, you're always welcome. And it was really fun to, you know, to just see, because I've had nothing but amazing interactions with Al, so it was great to see that extended to my family at that performance. So,
was that the first time your wife and daughters got to see Al?
Yeah, it was, and I had to, you know, explain what was happening because, you know, if you don't know going in, it could be a little jarring. However, you know, they knew some of the original songs, right? The original versions of the songs. So, you know, especially Tacky, which is the Pharrell song, Happy. So they could gravitate towards some of those songs that they knew. Perform This Way, which is based on Lady Gaga's Born This Way. So there was a couple, you know, usual suspects that they recognized. So it wasn't going in completely blind. And of course, the pomp and circumstance that Al brings to his shows, it really just, you know, it's so infectious. The energy that he has on stage and his performances, so it was not a hard sell for the girls to enjoy that performance, as most of the audience was.
Yeah,
I'm certain.
Yeah. And your wife and daughter are still fans today, I hope.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. And it's so funny. I hadn't thought about Al in a little while, and you know, it's always interesting when, you know, people interview you about a show that happened 5 years ago, but. I hadn't thought about it, and you guys reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in recording this podcast, which of course I jumped on in a heartbeat. It's so fun to talk about Weird Al and his music, and it was odd. We were watching the Kevin Hart Netflix special on Black History, and Al is in that at the end.
Yeah.
He's the dad to the kid, right? And I'm like, life is so funny. I hadn't thought about Al and his music for a little while, and then all of a sudden, in like the same day, you guys emailed me, and he's on the Netflix special that my kids picked out of random on Netflix. So shameless promo for Netflix, but oh well, there we are.
Now, were there any Weird Al songs that you really wish you could have gotten to orchestrate?
Oh, not really. I mean, he picked such a great kind of cross section of songs from his catalog that really, kind of started from the beginning and then, all the way through. I mean, I remember growing up going to see UHF in the theaters. Yeah. I may have been one of three in the theater, but I kid because I care. But no, I just remember, like, that was my first introduction to Al and his music, and there's a certain part of me that wanted to see like maybe some songs from that or
right,
UHF or whatever it may be. But no, I mean, like I said, the variety of styles that were required of me. Because of the song choices was really engaging for me as a musician. You don't wake up each day and say, "Oh, what polka am I going to write today?" That just doesn't really roll off the tongue, right? So it's just fun to like be asked to wear those different hats, and I'm trying to remember the one. I think the Saga Begins. That's the one with. It's based on. American Pie, right? If I'm trying to remember correctly. Long time ago, yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
It goes through the whole Star Wars thing. And being a Star Wars nerd myself, that was really fun to do. Was to, this Anakin guy. Just the way that he created that brought me back to my, my 5 or 6 year old self when I saw the original movie in the theater,
Yeah.
So it's funny because music is a lot like a scent, right? Like you smell something, it transports you back to that time period you first smell it. And music's very much the same way. You hear, a piece of music that you remember from a certain time period, and it's just got this transportational feel to it. Like all of a sudden you blink your eye and you're like in a different place, So, but yeah, it was fun in those lines. So I didn't feel like I was missing something with the song in the set list.
Yeah.
To roundabout answer your question.
Now, obviously, we just mentioned Saga Begins, and that's based on American Pie, but, you're orchestrating that song not for American Pie, but for the Saga Begins. Are there, ways to put a nod to the lyrics and, maybe, put in a Star Wars musical reference, or was there any way to put in Easter eggs like that when you're working on these?
Well, that runs into a little trickiness because there's copyrights and John Williams' music is very much protected along those lines. So if I did something like that, it was very like super alluding. It wasn't like outwardly da 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 da.
Right,
I didn't put any of that in there because it creates havoc not only for for Al and his team, but also the orchestra of like all of a sudden they're shuffling of like, oh boy. So but occasionally you can put little nods like da 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 da, just little nuggets like that.
Yeah,
where you don't have to be so overt about it, but can really complement it and kind of set the stage for the audience, with this type of subject matter, right? I mean, it's hard not to think about the Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
When he's singing about the Saga Begins, or the Star Wars music, I should say.
Now, as you're writing the orchestrations for all these pieces, and you're listening to the songs that Weird Al sent you and the live versions, and was there anything in there that caught you by surprise as far as maybe what Al did with his lyrics or musically as you were listening to all these songs?
What struck me initially, and it kind of permeated through most of the songs, was Al's craft at coming up with lyrics that rhyme within the constraints of the song that he was parodying. Does that make sense? And the way that the lyric had a storytelling quality that was essentially its own song, even though it was based on another song. And just each one was like, and I had a colleague of mine help me to kind of, because there was such a massive amount of material to kind of, transcribe and kind of get ready. So I had a friend of mine help me transcribe a few of these songs, and that was his first comment, was like, my God, these lyrics are amazing. He says he's literally, I mean, and that's why I brought up the Pulitzer earlier. It was like a lot of this could stand alone. You take it out of the context of the song, out of the parody, and just look at the lyric itself. And, yes, they're supposed to have a funny element to it and a tongue-in-cheek element to it. But some of it, like Fat, I know was very personal for him, the lyrics for that, because he struggled with weight early on in his youth. And so this was just a way of kind of almost a cathartic expression of getting that angst that he had from it. But it was in his own way, right? So it was in a way that felt like a parody, but in some way was very cathartic for him, to kind of work through, I'm fat, you know it. I mean, it's so openly, like that. But the way he did it, you could almost feel like he was getting energy out of it. There was like built up tension from his past that was getting out of it. And again, you look at the lyrics on their own, and it's, I don't know, it transcended more than what the song was, is what I'm trying to say. So that's what I took away from it.
So the Hollywood Bowl shows were in 2016, and then it was 2019 when Al did the Strings Attached tour. Did you have to do any adjustments to the music, or did he just really use the exact same sheets you made?
Well, I did have to adjust certain things because, first of all, the shows at the Hollywood Bowl enjoy a very large orchestra size. The stage is big. There's a lot, it's almost 18,000 people that can fit in there. So the resources are such as that we can have a fairly large orchestra. It was hovering around 100 players on stage.
Oh, wow.
And for the tour, I believe, and I was working with Arnie on this, I believe they had budgeted like 40. So I basically had to adjust things that worked for 100 players down to 40. And it sounds daunting when you do the straight up math, but the reality was most of the player reduction came from the string size, the amount of string players. And so a fair amount of that difference, the 60 player difference, came from the string players. And because of mics and mixing and all the great sound guys that are on Al's team, they can make that sound bigger with a smaller amount of people. And the other thing, too, is because each stop on the tour, each city, was hiring local players to be in the orchestra, it was easier to put together a full show with less people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, to have a 100-piece orchestra was really a hard thing to kind of work logistically to make it happen in a day, because like we had talked about before, the rehearsal would happen in the afternoon and then the performance that night, and pack it up and move on. So economy of not only economics, because it costs less to have 40 people, but also to be able to move and be more nimble with that size of an orchestra. So what I had to do was take these large orchestrations from the Hollywood Bowl shows, and I worked with Arnie, and he gave me the number of players and the instrumentation that we were going to have. So I was happy to kind of rework some of it. He did some of it as well. And so between that and a few well-placed Dropbox links, we were able to make it all come together. And it's so funny, guys, because when I first kind of got into the industry 20 some odd years ago, the thought of Dropbox or PDFs and emailing files like this was really at its infancy. And so to think of like, how would we like literally execute this plan to take all of this music that was, in my hard drive and in Arnie's hard drive and Scott O'Neill in Colorado, like, how do you put this all together, and not like literally hire your own postal team to make it happen. So, but, to the credit of Arnie and his team, and, we all worked on this to really get the best product and to adapt everything so that we kept all the good stuff, right? And the stuff we had to cut out from the orchestrations wasn't significant enough that would alter the sound of that particular song and the way Al performs it. So and you guys saw the tour. I know it was very successful, but it was really an honor to be kind of a behind the scenes part of that process. So, and along the way, you go to music school and then we all scatter after we graduate. And so I have friends in different orchestras around the country, and they would either on social media, or they would send me texts they would take photos of their parts that would have my name on it, and hey, look what showed up in my folder today. So it was fun to kind of see the tour from that, from those updates. Like, all right, what friend of mine is on this gig in Milwaukee, or on this gig in Chicago, or wherever they are this week. So it was cool, and it was a pretty ambitious tour schedule for Al.
Yeah.
How many dates did it end up being? I know you guys went to, you said like 18 of them, right?
Yeah, it was a very long tour. It was about 3 months long, I believe. And it was pretty much, they didn't have too many off days, so it was pretty much straight through, maybe one off day a week. Yeah.
That's a lot. from being on tours in the past. It's pretty challenging. It sounds very sexy and romantic when you're, go to tour bus and all that, but man, it's not sexy at 4:30 in the morning when you pull into a hotel and they're like, "Get out, the bus has got to go get gas," So.
Now, Sean, were there any talks of you doing more orchestrating or even any conducting for the Strings Attached tour?
There was a little bit, but the opportunity really wasn't there. Arnie had it covered from the start, and the only additional writing that I did was basically adapting what I had already done. Al had a few other songs, I guess, in the works, but my schedule was not at the place where I could jump into that anyway.
Okay.
So I wasn't necessarily sad about it, just because I knew I didn't. Even if it was offered to me, I didn't have the wherewithal and the resources to be able to jump in on it. So, and that happens occasionally. Fortunately, very occasionally.
Yeah.
Because usually when you're a musician and you're a professional, the answer is yes, and then you figure out how to do it later. So. One of my composition teachers back in grad school would say, you sleep when you're dead. If a gig comes your way, you do the gig and then figure it out later. But
now, for a lot of the songs on the Strings Attached tour that you hadn't already written the orchestrations for, the orchestrator for those was Scott O'Neill. Did you work at all with Scott on any of those orchestrations, or did he bounce any ideas off of you?
I did not. Scott kind of worked in his own bubble on those particular songs. And I know Scott from his conducting prowess with the Colorado Symphony. He and I originally were introduced for a show with Sarah McLachlan. I had written all the orchestrations for Sarah, or most of them. Vince Mendoza did a few of them. Another great arranger, Grammy-winning, a writer and everything. Vince is awesome. He's still a hero of mine. And so the first performance of all these was at Red Rocks, and Scott conducted that. So I got a chance to get to know Scott from that experience.
Cool.
And, great musician, very talented. And so when I heard he was involved in the project, you just don't worry, and certainly love having my name, the apostrophes have to stick together apparently. So with O'Neill and O'Loughlin, there's no way you can be wrong. So.
So, Sean, there's a long list of pop and rock artists that you've worked with, and I would like to ask you about a few of those in a little bit. But
sure.
Just overall, where does working with Weird Al fit into that list as far as, challenging is he challenging to write orchestrations for compared to, let's say, writing orchestrations for Steven Tyler or anybody else you've worked with?
The inherent challenge, kind of, I mentioned earlier, was just the different styles that I had to jump into,
right?
Between rap and pop and polka and everything in between, and to kind of make it sound right. But then also, there's a certain element of my voice in this too. The way I like to write, the kind of things that I enjoy including in orchestrations. But Al was certainly, with ease of use in terms of collaborating, he was right there at the top. I mean, just so available. Like, I would email him something, he would get back to me within the hour, if not sooner.
Wow.
So I didn't feel like on an island with him. There was nobody in between. There was no, like I said earlier, there was no music director or, someone else in the band that I would have to go through. And then what that does is it just creates more time. It's a lag between, getting your question asked and getting your question answered. And for me, the legitimacy of having, the artist himself kind of heavily involved in this. And I pulled up on my computer here some of my notes that I took from our meeting at his house, and then subsequent questions that I would have along the way once I actually got writing into each song. And he was just so, first of all, welcoming to my ideas of the orchestration and kind of making it into something bigger, right? Because that was always his intent. He could play a show with his band any day of the week, but to play a show with an orchestra, especially to start the whole thing off with the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra at the Hollywood Bowl, that's something completely different, right? So he really wanted it right, and he wanted it, he wanted it to be the best it can be. So his and I collaboration on a one-on-one level was just very satisfying, both artistically and as a colleague, And I'm on his Christmas card list, so I must have made a certain impression with him. So we always like to see what crazy photos he sends out for his Christmas card. But
very nice.
Yeah, and for me, each of the artists that I've had the pleasure and good fortune to work with, each have their own real kind of cool, unique things. Steven Tyler was one, and I got to talk to him on the phone a couple times, and then I got to meet him a little bit before the shows at the Hollywood Bowl, and he was quite a character. And rightfully so, he pervades this uber rock star persona, right? I mean, he looks the part.
Yeah.
He kind of,
sure, yeah.
His performance on stage and everything. What struck me, not unlike Al, but what struck me was how articulate musically, and from a training standpoint that they were. They could articulate what a melody was and what different orchestrations they wanted to hear. Steven Tyler was great. Man, Sean, man, I really hear the strings here. He sounds like that on the phone. I'm like, it's like I feel like I'm in third grade getting yelled at by Mrs. Laurenti again. But no, it's just cool to see that side of the artist that most of the general public doesn't get to see, and that I'm fortunate to see that part of them. And what struck me not only about Steven Tyler and some of the other, I'm fortunate to work with Sarah McLachlan. I got to work with her one-on-one in the same collaborative way as with Steven and Weird Al, and you really get to see what makes them so good. It's not just the shiny stuff on the outside. It's, man, the substance of their songs, whether it be the lyrics or the melody or the harmony. Some of these songs, you're like, oh, that's why they're good. You know what I mean? When you start peeling off the layers of the onion, oh, that's why that's good. Or if it's one lyric that keeps coming back or whatever it may be. That was the real joy for me of kind of seeing a different side of these artists that you normally wouldn't get to see unless, I'm orchestrating their music for them. So, I try not to make eye contact too much, guys. Just take it when it comes.
Now, Sean, with the pandemic, obviously it's kind of tough to be putting on symphony shows, but you figured out kind of an interesting way with the Victoria Symphony and Symphoria. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's two slightly different approaches, but one similar medium, and that being a streaming access to performances. So, New York State has a certain amount of health restrictions on people on stage, et cetera. So, and then I've been, because of some travel restrictions as well and quarantine requirements, I haven't been able to get to all of my Pops shows that we've been presenting. So I've had to do some video hosting from my house here, and then we kind of drop it into the live stream. So with Symphoria in Syracuse, they are presenting virtual concerts, and we basically kept the same amount of weeks that we were going to present in a live, in concert hall setting. But we've been really fortunate. One of our patrons in the Syracuse area has a performance venue and space that we've been able to utilize and present our concerts from. So some concerts with larger orchestras have, some plexiglass and, the string players with masks. So we are adhering to all the, social distancing and health requirements to kind of make it happen. And then it's presented. We're basically selling virtual tickets. So it's like a ticket that you would buy for a performance, or you can do a subscription, etc. And shameless plug, experiencesymphoria.org is where all those performances are located. And it's presented through Vimeo, the streaming service, which is a higher quality audio and video service than some of the other streaming options. And so it's a great way for the musicians of the orchestra to keep in touch with our audience, even though we're not able to be together. So we're doing that. In Victoria, with the symphony up there, I physically can't get up there because of the borders closed. So, and even if I got up there, I would have to quarantine for something like 14 or 17 days.
Wow.
It's pretty aggressive. And you totally get it, right? I mean, you can't, it's nobody's fault. It's just we're trying to get a noose on this damn virus to try and get us all back to normal and get us on stage, which is what we're wired to do. We're not wired to be on someone's laptop. We're wired to be in front of you, on stage performing live. So, but Victoria's been very, very fortunate to have some great underwriting, and so we're presenting not live stream, but streamed concerts that are available for a month at a time. And so I did a Christmas Pops program with them where we had the brass players and percussionists at a beautiful church in downtown Victoria that we were able to record in. And then I'm presenting another Pops concert in the spring that'll be a tribute to Broadway that'll be available on victoriasymphony.ca. And we're asking our patrons, in lieu of purchasing tickets for those performances, to consider donating. And, the more that we can kind of create this lifeboat, which is the virtual performances right now, the more, and I know everyone's doing it. You see Melissa Etheridge, Al's got some performances. Josh Groban is another artist that I've worked with extensively. He's presenting virtual concerts as well. And it is that, it's a literal lifeboat to keep the performing arts alive. And, any help that your listeners can do along those lines will just help us create music and keep those concerts coming, so that when we're all ready to go back to being, I don't know if it'll be normal, but it'll be at least in the same building together. Then, it's going to be like, the heavens opening up, I think. People are just so starving for it right now. So that's what we're doing,
Yeah, and it really is important to preserve the arts for when we can enjoy them in person again. Sean, this has just been really, really an awesome time chatting with you, hearing about your career and the process and working with Al. For more information about you and your career and eventually your actual live shows, we can head over to your website. It's SeanO'Loughlin.com. And you also mentioned people can head over to the Victoria Symphony and Symphoria to check out those awesome online presentations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, guys, what a thrill. I feel like we're one happy hour away from another happy hour. So it was very fun indeed.
Yes, thank you so much. And hopefully at some point we can finally see you in person conducting a real live show. And I think that would be really fun.
Your words in God's ears, my friend.
Well, huge thank you to Sean O'Loughlin for joining us on the podcast. Dave, we can officially finish our punch card of Weird Al Strings Attached Tour Orchestrators. 2 out of 2 punches.
All right, that's awesome. All right, so let's see. We've got 3 out of the 3 backup singers. And so let's see. We just need another 2,624 orchestra members, and I think we'll have a full card.
Yeah!
Now, Ethan and I were both a bit surprised to hear Sean's story about Al's explanation for the origin of fat.
Well, so we reached out to Bermuda to see if he had ever heard that story, and he wasn't familiar with it either.
Well, whatever becomes of it, I think we can all safely agree that it is entirely our intern Frank's fault.
Absolutely. This week's episode is brought to you in part by David Grant, promoting David Grant at wolfandwool.com.
Not only is David Grant, he's also MC Chalkskin.
We've heard a lot about MC Chalkskin's debut, Fresh Donuts, but did you know there are a total of 3 MC Chalkskin albums?
3 MC Chalkskin albums, you say? Oh boy, I feel like I need to tell my friend Sheepdog all about this wonderful revelation.
Well, while you're doing that, Dave, let me tantalize your eardrums with the names of these other 2 albums.
Okay, but please go slow. I'm texting Sheepdog, and you know I'm a really slow typer.
Okay, so the follow-up to Fresh Donuts is Payday.
Oh, like the candy bar.
Yeah, actually.
So MC Chalkskin, he really likes his sweets, huh?
I suppose so.
And what's the 3rd album called? Apple Pie Squared?
Actually, it's just called the Whitey album.
As in Tidy Whities?
I'm not sure that's what he's going for, but yeah.
Well, maybe he knows something that we don't.
So visit wolfandwool.com on your next music expedition. And after you visit wolfandwool.com, be sure to visit http://www.wolfandwool.com.
This week's episode is also brought to you in part by Discover Darwin, promoting tourism in Darwin, Minnesota. Not only is historic Darwin, Minnesota beautiful, it's also banking.
Welcome back to our series of Discover Darwin ads about banking!
Really? We're doing this 3 weeks in a row?
Yep, 3 weeks in a row. There's just so much to cover with Perennial Bank. You could even say this ad is becoming a regular thing.
Wouldn't our time be better spent talking about the upcoming Free Park Day on Saturday, June 12th?
In 1914, 12 local businessmen bought shares of bank stock and raised enough money to start Farmers State Bank.
All 75 Minnesota state parks and state recreation areas will be offering free admission.
J.E. Nelson became the first president of the bank, but then sold control of the bank to the Ilstrup family in the 1950s.
The entrance fee waiver does not cover amenity or user fees like camping, rentals, or special tours.
In that same year, Neil and Betty Johnson moved to Darwin and were employed by the bank.
Now, there's a state park within 30 miles of most Minnesotans.
The Johnson family purchased the bank in 1970.
If you're a Minnesota resident, you can fish in many state parks without a fishing license.
Following the death of his father in 1992, Mark Johnson became president of Farmers State Bank.
So visit Darwin, Minnesota on your next expedition. Discover Darwin more than just a twine ball. And after you visit Darwin, Minnesota, be sure to visit discoverdarwin.biz.
Each week, we're able to bring you our podcast absolutely free, thanks to our amazing sponsors, Burrito, Discover Darwin, Jackson Scoggins, and David Grant.
And thanks to all of our amazing close personal friend Patreon supporters, Jared, Jake, Javier, UH Jeff, Zeb, Allison, Blair, Frank from the bank, and Kenneth. And thanks to William and everyone else in our pretty stinking majestic Patreon family.
If you enjoy our family-friendly weekly Weird Al podcast, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/2000inch or by picking up some pretty stinking majestic official Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast merchandise, such as socks, towels, more socks, leggings, face masks, or even socks at shop.2000inch.com.
I wonder if we have any ties. Remember, right now, Patreon supporters can check out the Black and White and Weird All Over bonus episode 1 centimeter and bonus episode 2 centimeter, the first 2 episodes in our special book series, where we sit down with author John Bermuda Schwartz and go page by page, picture by picture, centimeter by centimeter through his book, Black and White and Weird All Over. Patreon supporters get to hear all of our bonus episodes early. Everyone else, stay tuned, or, join our Patreon family.
We love hearing from our listeners and other Weird Al fans. Join our Facebook community and post about Weird Al by visiting group.2000inch.com. And we also love it when we receive voicemail via our official 27-hour-a-day podcast hotline, 347-SPATULA. You might even hear your message on the show.
For everything about our podcast, including incredible past episodes and past guests, be sure to visit WeirdAlPodcast.com or 2000inch.com and keep up on new episodes, podcast news, and events by following at 2000inch on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you for subscribing and leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Spotify, Stitcher, or the podcast app of your choice.
Thank you once again to our guest, Sean O'Loughlin, and thank you to John Bermuda Schwartz. Thank you to the Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimowes for our incredible theme song, and thank you to Weird Al Yankovic, as this podcast probably would not exist without him. And a big thank you to all of you, our listeners, subscribers, Patreon supporters, and sponsors, and everyone else who makes our podcast possible.
Thank you for listening to Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, and always remember to gill and chill.
So, are we going to celebrate the 2-year anniversary of each and every show we saw on the Strings Attached tour?
I don't see why not.
Okay, great. We're on the same page.
That was Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, episode 110-inch.
Orchestrated by the Grammy Award-winning Jim Kimowes.
And he just starts going like, Y-O-D-A Yoda.
Yeah.